And thank you for being here at this most important event. Worcester, as I'm sure all of you know, is at an important juncture. We are tasked as a community with the very important role of selecting a superintendent who will lead our public schools. We're also at an important point because of several other factors that are affecting education in our city. One is the coming change in the composition of the Worcester Public Schools Committee. The other is the infusion of dollars as a result of various federal recovery acts. And then the long-term change that we will see as a result of the Student Opportunity Act, which will change the way we fund schools in the Commonwealth. And our panelists, let me first introduce Karin Chenoweth. Karin will be serving as our moderator and wrangler for today. Karin is a writer in residence with the Education Trust in Washington, D.C. Also joining us is Glenn Koocher, who is the Executive Director of the Massachusetts Association of School Committees. Keri Rodrigues, who is the founding director of the Massachusetts Parents Union, and also Paul Reville, who is past Secretary of Education for the Commonwealth and a professor of practice at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. Our format today will be remarks by Karin, remarks by the panelists, some targeted questions, and then we will open it for question and discussion from public participants. And if everyone could remember to be muted unless you're speaking, that would be very helpful. And when it's time, when we open it up for questions, please submit your questions through the chat. I will try to aggregate the questions into different buckets, and then we'll pass them on to the panelists. So why don't we begin? I'm going to pass the talking stick now to Karin.
Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody who's here. Before I start, I just want to acknowledge that this is a really tough time. It's a tough time for schools. It's a tough time for our nation. So thank you. You're coming together as a community to think about what your schools need. And in that way, you're playing your part in helping create a more perfect union, which we all have to do. But today I'm here to talk about the importance of district leadership in school improvement. So a little more than 15 years ago, I went to work for the Education Trust, a national education advocacy organization that works to improve the academic achievement of all children, particularly children of color and children from low-income homes. My job was to help find and learn from schools and districts that were doing what we advocate for, helping all children learn a great deal. I've written a bunch of books about high-performing and improving schools and districts that serve children of color and children from low-income homes. And as a matter of fact, I've learned a lot from several of Worcester's finest educators, I would say. Today, I'm going to share two big things I've observed in the dozens of effective schools that I've visited and written about. The first is, and I know this sounds really boring, but the first is that each one of them holds some version of this meeting. These are teachers looking at data to identify problems, identify possible solutions, see the effect of previous solutions they had put in place, expose expertise within the group, and identify gaps in their collective knowledge. In other words, they are engaged in very deep collaboration. But I will tell you, most teachers are not trained to do this kind of collaboration, and it doesn't come naturally. A lot of systems have to be put in place in order for it to happen, systems that aren't in place in a lot of schools. Which leads to the second thing that I have observed. Every one of the effective schools I have been in has had a principal who considered it their job to lead collaboration and who puts in place the systems necessary for it to happen. Which is to say that school improvement is almost entirely reliant on school leaders. And by the way, you don't have to listen to me about that. If you're interested, I can provide a lot of very rigorously conducted research that agrees with that observation. But what makes principals effective? What I would say is effective principals believe that all kids can learn and organize the work of schools around that belief. But over the years, what I have seen is that principals eventually leave to take other jobs or to retire. And what I have noticed is that some of their schools stay high performing or continue improving, and some fall apart, which has led me to another observation. You can fix schools all you want. If the districts they sit in are dysfunctional, they will not stay fixed. After all, it is district leaders who, among other things, hire and place principals and then either support their work or undermine it. So that led me to study a few highly effective districts, and I wrote what I found in this book. What I will tell you is that what I found is leaders who understand how important school leaders are and who organize their districts around that belief. That means they organize budgets, schedules, curricula, discipline policies, and professional development in ways that support the success of principals and thus students. It also means they're extremely careful about hiring and placing principals. And I will tell you that most districts seem to take a rather haphazard approach that relies more on personal connections than on a proven capacity to lead improvement. But the former superintendent of Chicago Public Schools, which has been improving now for decades, surprise, I'll talk endlessly about that to anybody who wants to talk about it. She attributes the improvement to the way that Chicago Public Schools transformed what it means to be a principal in the city. So if I were a resident of Worcester, I would want the school committee to select a superintendent who has a proven track record of improvement and who understands the key role of principals and has a clear idea of how to support them. So that's kind of all I have to say. Because you have a lot more, you have a lot of really fabulous panelists who will share other insights that they have. I think I passed the baton to Keri Rodrigues, President of the National Parents Union.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully everybody can hear me. Hi there, my name is Keri Rodrigues. I am the president of the National Parents Union and the founder of Massachusetts Parents United. But a long time ago, I was a resident of Worcester and also a news anchor on WTAG in Worcester. So Worcester is a very special place in my heart and a place that I have been blessed to know very well. And so I'm just so grateful to be with you this afternoon and grateful to join you. I also want to shout out, I'm seeing so many beautiful parent leaders on this Zoom today, people who have been longtime leaders in the community, who have been powerful advocates, who are doing really critical work in our communities. And I'd love to see them being an active part of this conversation and this process. Because to me, you know, this is a very pivotal moment that we're in right now. And the voices of parents and community are critical in this process and in ensuring that we have an equity infused educational recovery after the pandemic. So what I want to leave you with today as we begin this conversation, just kind of my remarks, is that I am hopeful that, you know, the community in Worcester remains an active participant and their concerns are and their priorities are taken very seriously, because what we're seeing right now nationally in cities, not only here in Massachusetts, but across the country, is a an active engagement by parents and families who are deeply concerned about the future of our schools. And the national surveys that we have done with the National Parents Union, we've done over 22 of them, have indicated by a 2-to-1 margin, parents and families view this time period as a unique opportunity for us to reimagine education. And you see a lot of us raising our voices, showing up, wanting to be active participants in the creation and the collaboration around how we spend ESSER funds and an unprecedented amount of resources that are now flooding into districts, making sure that our priorities are heard, and turning our relationships with our schools, with the teachers who are leading classrooms every single day, the administrators that are in charge of running our entire districts, turning those relationships from transactional to transformational. So the leader that we select in Worcester is going to have a unique opportunity to decide what path we go down. And from where I sit, here in Massachusetts, but from what I see across the country, what we're looking for is courageous and bold leadership from superintendents who really set the tone in terms of what those relationships are going to look like. So I appreciate being invited to the conversation today and look forward to our discussion. And
Thank you, Keri.
There we go.
Okay. Our next speaker will be Glenn Koocher. Glenn is the Executive Director of the Mass Association of School Committees. Glenn?
Thank you, and thank you very much for the invitation to be here. I've been asked to talk about what the best superintendent and school board relationships look like. So I want to quickly summarize what our experience has been with some of the most effective superintendents and the discussions we've had with our colleagues around the country. Just in a bit of memorial spirit, we lost Stephen Sondheim last week, a great composer lyricist for Broadway. And what's not well known is that he once wrote a musical with Richard Rodgers. It didn't go well, but somebody asked them on a television show, which comes first, the concept, the lyrics, or the music? And Richard Rodgers said, you're going in the wrong place. What comes first is the contract. So with a successful superintendent, things begin with the contract. And part of the contracting process with the superintendent is to develop mutually respectable terms of employment, mutually agreeable goals, a sense of what the vision is, and a sense of what it's going to take for the superintendent to lead in getting those things done. And, when you say that you're looking for a courageous leader, you're also looking for a superintendent who can cultivate courageous followers who can be part of the success of the program. The other elements of a strong superintendent and school board relationship, which affects the community and the abilities to improve student achievement, is they each understand their roles, and they understand the roles of the principals, because the superintendents, the principals, and the classroom teachers are the most effective instruments to improving student achievement. I think people pretty much agree on that. But the lines of authority between the board and the superintendent and the superintendent's subordinates are often vague and need to be worked out. And a good superintendent who's going to be successful is an excellent communicator who's able to resolve all the ambiguities in the roles and responsibilities of superintendents and school board members and even principals. That means that nobody end runs anyone else. A school committee does not want to find it faced with a major decision that needs to be made, only to find that its options don't exist because the superintendent has spent the last few months co-opting them and making the decisions that make further decisions impossible. That's what costs superintendents their jobs, and it ruins relationships. And the same is true for boards that try to get in the way of the superintendents doing their jobs. And I'm not necessarily referring to any particular board, it's just something that happens generally. So we always encourage newly elected board members and superintendents to sit down and identify those areas where blue and yellow become green and you can't necessarily resolve by law who's in charge of what. That's what calls for collaboration and great success. Neither the superintendent nor the school committee members nor employees of the district should be busy upstaging each other. The principals should be effective at running their business. They shouldn't be running for governor. The superintendent shouldn't be looking for the next job, and school board members should not be looking for the next political opportunity. Although, as we've seen, the school board is not a great place to mount a political career. But, and that's why so many of our members stay 1 and 2 terms and then move on, having pursued their goals and having worked with the superintendents. With regard to professional practice, I want to say just a couple of things. Number one, it's most important that the superintendent and the school committee meet with the stakeholders to identify goals and mutually agreeable strategies about how to get there. This includes work on making policies, how you get a budget done, how you get your communications protocols in place, and how you reach out to the community. And then once you've developed the goals and the protocols, you develop the evaluation tool with the superintendent so that the superintendent knows what is expected and the school committee knows how to measure the effectiveness of the progress going there. I would also say it's an opportunity to start planning for best practices in collective bargaining and how to bargain for student achievement. With regard to the best practices that the public sees, varied and purposeful meetings of the school committee, led by the chair and the superintendent, often involving the principals and the teachers, are very effective in convincing the faculty and the community that you're serious about student achievement. When they see the board asking intelligent questions, when they see the faculty responding and the superintendent responding appropriately, people take things seriously and they know that people are watching and following developments. The school committee should be the place with the table, and the superintendent should be the place where discussions of controversy start long before the buttons need to be pushed. You need 2 years of communicating with your community to talk intelligently about critical race theory. Nobody understands it, but the wrong people are making headway, scaring people over what it is and what it isn't. We can talk a little bit about that later. The issue of equity, the same way. Everybody's calling for equity, but when it comes time to take the steps that achieve equity, even the most allegedly progressive people get cold feet. We want to encourage with the superintendent principled dissent and disagreement. In other words, disagreement and dissent are good when they're done in a way that the public can appreciate and understand. And effective practices to manage those outlier issues that occur, and how the superintendent and the school committee and key members of the faculty will be able to build a good, strong relationship that can withstand some of the assaults that are sometimes taking place. And finally, the superintendent is an advocate, as are members of the school committee. A successful superintendent-school committee relationship includes visible, active advocacy on the part of what's best for students and student achievement. And that needs to be worked out ahead of time so that it's collaborative and effective. I'll say one final thing. Good communicators do not fail as superintendents. Elitist snobs fail. Insecure, control, obsessive leaders fail. People who are not truthful fail. But good communicators working with the faculty, with the school committee, and with the community are almost always successful. I'll hold it there and look forward to responding to questions and filling in some of the gaps as we go on. Do I introduce the next speaker, or is that?
I can do that. Thank you, Glenn. Our next speaker is Paul Reville. Paul is past Secretary of Education for the Commonwealth. Many of us know Paul from his time here in Worcester and his leadership here in education matters here in Worcester. And currently, Paul is a professor of practice at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. Paul?
Hello, everybody. It's wonderful to be back, however, virtually in Worcester. I appreciate the invitation, Jennifer, and I'm honored to be part of a panel with a lot of distinguished voices. And I hope I can contribute something because a number of the panelists have said some very important things to think about in the selection of the superintendent. I participated as a Worcester resident of more than 30 years in various searches for the superintendency in Worcester. And I've learned some things through those processes and other processes in which I've been involved in statewide and nationally. I will say that now is a particularly challenging time, obviously, given the pandemic, given the racial reckoning that we're having nationally, given the very divisive nature of discourse on public education in our country at the moment. I talk with superintendents all across the country on a regular basis, and mayors in communities across the country, and their concerns about students' mental health, the concerns about violence, which we just saw yesterday, rising up in the schools, the divisive nature of school board meetings across the country right now, and the politics generally, the sense of personal threat that many of our leaders experience on a day-to-day basis. On account of nothing more than the positions that they're taking on public health issues. These are tough jobs. And so I think one thing at the outset is in the recruitment process, I think communities need to bend over backwards to encourage candidates to come forward, to encourage good people to come forward. It's not necessarily a given that people are going to flock to these jobs in this moment. Many people are moving away from these jobs. So I think that'd be a place where I'd start, is thinking very intentionally about how you're going to get as strong a pool as possible, and talking to as many people as you can about potential leaders and how to reach out and persuade some of those people who may not be thinking about coming to your district to consider coming to the district and make a sale while this community, which I think is second to none in the kind of opportunity it offers to a superintendent. It's a medium-sized city, and you can get things done in Worcester. A strong leader can get things done in Worcester, can know everybody in the overall ecosystem around education, and can develop partnerships and can set priorities, and things can be accomplished. So I think it's an attractive spot for either a sitting superintendent or an aspiring superintendent. And I would urge you to make a strong case for you as you go forward. My experience in Worcester has taught me, you can get really bogged down in discussions over insiders versus outsiders. Should we be going with somebody who's in-house and knows the system, knows where the bodies are buried, knows everybody who's involved and how to get things done? And, some of that's important. Certainly understanding how a school system works. I would argue that if you understand that generically, how a school system works, if you know something deeply about teaching and learning and about how central offices work and about how individual schools work and about the nature and tension of the relationship between central offices and schools, that's a good thing. It need not be knowledge that is based on this particular school system. So you're really looking for the best candidate, somebody from outside, if they have the requisite skills, may be just as strong. And Worcester certainly had that experience as somebody who's chosen from inside. But it's sort of a favorite pastime in these situations to get bogged down. And do we need somebody from inside or outside? And I'd encourage you to avoid that. On my list of important things, I've already mentioned one, just the knowledge and understanding of how school systems work as a whole, individual schools, and in particular, knowledge about teaching and learning, which ultimately is what this enterprise is about. The core business is teacher, student, and curriculum, and people who know how to optimize that transaction between teacher, student, and curriculum are going to be, it's going to be really important to have that knowledge if you're leading a school system and not get distracted from that as the fundamental core business. Several people have mentioned vision and the importance of vision in this moment, the capacity to use this crisis as an opportunity to reimagine what schools might look like, to have broad enough vision to see that children's lives are more than just schools, so that when we come to the equity question, and an equity mindset, I think is critically important, but it's important that it not be performative, that it not be a bunch of rhetoric, but that people see what the equity issues are, that they're willing to come to grips with that kind of data that we saw earlier on the table in the slide that Karin showed, that people are willing to be transparent about where we stand and the degree to which the school system is serving young people in our community. And at the same time, that we be broad-minded enough to know that children spend only 20% of their waking hours between kindergarten and grade 12 in school. 80% of their waking hours are spent outside of school. So schools alone can't do this job by themselves. They need a partnership with the community. And that's part of, several of you have talked about collaboration. Part of the skills that I'd look for in a superintendent is somebody who can build partnerships, somebody who can build collaborative relationships, somebody who might build a children's cabinet that brings together all the people in the community who care about children's welfare and well-being, and get them functioning together, much as we did back in the days of the Alliance for Education in Worcester. And you have in the Worcester Education Collaborative, that kind of bringing the community together to say, it's unreasonable. If our equity notion is it's all about the schools and optimizing schools, and if we just get schools doing the right thing, then we'll have an equal opportunity society, is just naive in the extreme. It's going to take a whole community to do the things, particularly in a community with high concentrations of poverty. Those of us who have privilege, those of us who have access to social capital and economic capital, can provide our children with wraparound supports and services from prenatal all the way until they're in their 20s and 30s. Other people don't necessarily, by accident of birth, have access to those supports. And so if we as a community are committing to prepare all of our children to be successful in college and career, we're going to have to come together in other ways to support these children so that they can genuinely come to school ready to learn and ready to participate in a high-performing school system. Because if they come and first of all, if they don't arrive in the first place, or if they come and they're distracted by trauma or mental health problems or nutritional problems that aren't attended to by other sources in the community, then educators are going to have great difficulty in succeeding with the teaching and learning that they're trying to do. So we want a leader who takes into account the entire ecosystem that comprises the lives of children and influences how they show up in school and their readiness to learn. I teach courses at Harvard on leadership, policy, and politics of education. One of the things that emerges always in these courses is the importance of interpersonal skills. The communication skills have already been mentioned, but the capacity to work with others, the capacity to have political empathy when you have a school board that's composed of very different people with different perspectives, and to be a superintendent who can get along with all kinds of people from different perspectives and understand where people are coming from and why they believe what they believe, and how to interact with them and how to engage with your school board in a way where you can come out at the other end successfully, that everybody has a sense of participating in solving the problems collectively. The interpersonal skills in being an advocate in the community, in developing partnerships, in working with your team in the central office, and working with your key leaders in the field, the principals. These skills are really important, as is an associated skill, which I would just generally call political savvy. You've got to be able to size up a political environment in the city, within the school department, within the central office, within the community and the community-based organizations. People need a sense of who's who and how to get things done. Another thing that I'd emphasize is decisiveness. I think right now we're dealing with a field in education that's exhausted by virtue of all the challenges that I mentioned earlier, starting with COVID. And yet at the same time, many of us are talking about and thinking about transformative change. And there are all kinds of changes that I think are possible in this moment. Thinking more broadly about how we conceive the challenge of educating young people for success, that it goes beyond the schools, as I was just mentioning. Thinking about personalizing education, meeting each child where they are and giving them what they need. Doing a success plan for each child, having each child have a navigator. Using technology at a much higher and more sophisticated level than we've been able to do thus far. Engaging with families more deeply. Some school systems have been terrific at doing this during the pandemic. We've always given lip service to family engagement, but we've never really leaned into it as an important part of what we're doing. And that, of course, is what Keri's work is all about. We need to do better in that way. Thinking about curriculum and instruction, applied learning, project-based learning, problem-solving kinds of approaches to curriculum instruction, using, as we had to do during the pandemic, children's environment as a source of the challenges and subject and material with which we build curriculum, deeper learning, all of those kinds of things are possible. I think good leaders are going to have to be decisive and set priorities. There's a window of opportunity open in this crisis, but you can't get everything through the window at the same time. It's just too much. It's overwhelming and people are tired. So picking a few clear priorities and knowing not just how to talk about those at top level, but what do I actually do Monday morning if I want to make these things happen? Knowing how to implement strategy on the ground, what it looks like and how people will react to it, I think is really important. It's got to be somebody with a capacity to get things done. So it's already been mentioned, but I think a critical skill to look for is a capacity to pick talent. What is somebody's track record as you're checking out references and things in terms of picking talent and building a team that can get done the strategic objectives that the superintendent, the leader, the school board set together. And then finally, you're going to need somebody with a track record of resilience and perseverance in the face of all the conflicting forces and challenges that come on a personal level as well as a professional level in this moment. Lots of dissent. People who really will know how to deal with that, can stand up to that, can create some balance in their personal lives as against their professional lives so they can sustain their own health and well-being going forward. I think these are really important. Last point I'd make is just we do have an incredible opportunity with the Student Opportunity Act, the ESSER funding, the ARPA money. And this is a good example of what I talk about in terms of decisiveness and setting priorities is leaders are going to have to point in the direction of how do we make effective use of that money? Because, as research effectively documents, it's not how much money you have in education, it's how you spend it. And I think we're in an unprecedented situation in the world of education right now in having a quantity of resources that's really unprecedented. And what's going to happen is that people are going to be looking closely at how we as states, as school districts, as individual as schools spend that money and whether or not we get any value out of it. And so we've got to be successful at building a narrative. In other words, how do we determine what is value? And secondly, being able to show evidence that we've spent this money well and wisely. Because if we fail to do that, the consequence will be that those who have decision-making power in terms of funding education are going to back off if they don't see some value having come from this massive infusion of new dollars coming into education. So in conclusion, you've got a huge opportunity in what I think is a very attractive school system. It's a difficult time to find top quality leaders, but as I know from working with one of the pipelines that produces leaders to come into public education, there are a lot of talented people out there who are looking for challenges and a supportive opportunity to make a difference in education. And I think Worcester presents an ideal opportunity.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you. I am going to lob it back to Karin, who has some targeted questions for members of the panel. And then we'll begin to open it up for questions from the public. Karen.
So Dr. Reville, I was really struck by a lot of your comments. One of my thoughts, though, is as Worcester is starting to really think about this big infusion of money that's about to come, and I share your worry that if it's not spent well, it's going to be very hard to get more money in the future. How should a superintendent and the school board, the school committee, balance transparency around that decision making with, being able to actually make decisions? It seems like there's a tension. There might be a tension there in terms of how you sort of think through. These are good ways to spend money. How can superintendent really be transparent about that and yet decisive?
Well, I mean, I think it's, Karen, about welcoming the public into solving the problem that the district is facing. Glenn made some comments in this vein. First of all, it's about communicating to the public the challenge and opportunity that we have with this money, and then being exhaustive and allowing sufficient time for public engagement. I mean, I don't see a conflict with transparency. I don't think anybody's going to accept this being done in a back room someplace out of public view. But I think getting out into the public and giving people an opportunity to voice their concerns. People support what they help create. And if people have a sense that I've participated in the process, even if the process doesn't land ultimately where I wanted it to land, at least they had the decency to consult with me about what it is that I thought would be wise to do. And so I've always felt that, as a leader, I remember when we had, when the 2008 budget crisis hit in state government, we had to come out with budgets that were severely cut back relative to what they had been before. We used to go out and do public hearings on this. And when I led public hearings on education, I tried to put the problem in front of the public that we've got to do cutbacks in terms of the level at which we've been able to support you in the past. And we have to have a balanced budget. We don't have the luxury of being able to just spend indefinitely. So help me solve the problem. Don't just tell me what you want. Tell me how we're going to be able to afford what you want. What do I have to cut back, or where am I going to get new revenue? And likewise here, people are going to have a lot of good ideas about what they want to do with the money. But how do we fit this into an overall strategy for the district? For example, many districts out and about are trying to resolve this question of, okay, how much of this money ought we to determine in the central office be spent on a particular strategy? Let's say it's reading by third grade or early childhood education or, some particular strategy to improve teaching and learning. And how much should we give out to principals and just say, you make up your own decision as to how you want to spend the money? And there are a lot of complicated considerations there. I mean, on the one hand, principals are closer to their clients, the parents and families in that school, and they may have some pressing needs that are not shared by other schools, and you want them to have some money. At the same time, 3 years from now, people are going to come to the district and say, what were the things that you did with that money? What were the big strategies? What were your big bets? And how have those paid off? What evidence can you show me that actually it made a difference? And so we're going to have some evidence to answer that question affirmatively and positively, and in a way that would encourage people to continue to fund the education enterprise. So all of that is to say that there are very difficult questions here. So ultimately, we have a democracy. This is what we have school committees for. They're going to have to resolve a decision after they get a recommendation from a superintendent relative to how to spend money. But that shouldn't in any way prevent the superintendent and the school committee, for that matter, from going out and exhaustively listening to their constituents, not just in the general public, but within the school system itself as to how best to spend the money.
So I'm wondering, Keri, did what Dr. Reville talked about, does that resonate with you? Is that what you're looking for as a parent advocate, as someone who speaks, parent talk?
Well,
I think we all speak parent talk, but yeah, you officially speak parent talk.
well, and I'm grateful to do so, but I think Paul is right on point because, you know, if we're using the pandemic, the silver lining of this pandemic is the opportunity we have to move our interactions with parents and community from, again, transactional to transformational. Like it or not, parents have been the co-facilitators of education throughout the pandemic, throughout the past 18 months. Especially if you're a parent with a child in K-6 education, that was not happening without us literally sitting there and making sure it happened. We've seen a lot. All of this unfolded in our living rooms. And frankly, we have a vested interest in the success of our public education system because it's our kids who are going to pay the price if we're not successful in this. But because we have a lot of knowledge, because we have a lot of information, because we have a lot of context, it's our expectation that we are going to be a part of the process of collaborating and co-creating what it looks like moving forward. And what is very disturbing to us in the education justice parent advocacy space in this moment is watching a lot of districts, a lot of leaders, a lot of school committees want to kind of ooze back into the old way of doing things, which is, you know, a bunch of, you know, frankly, privileged folks sitting around a fancy glass conference room table, cooking up a solution and then imposing it on parents and communities. And we've done this time and again. It doesn't produce the results that we want. And frankly, we acknowledge the fact that we have a generationally, institutionally racist education system all across this country in every district. We've not done anything to disassemble it. And you know, we're in a transformational moment now where parents have seen too much, we've done too much, and we have the expectation that because we've had this unprecedented disruption that now we're going to build back better. You know, this is what the leadership of the country is saying right now. We have a lot of ideas and we expect to be engaged with respect as adults, you know, have our ideas and our context respected. And that's what we're coming to the table with. I mean, you in Worcester are blessed. You know, my friend Hilda Ramirez is actually on the Zoom right now. She's an extraordinary leader, and she is somebody who is on the ground right now and can be giving you real-time feedback about what she's hearing from parents and families to help create a plan that is most impactful, that gets us to the results that we actually want for our kids if we have leadership in the district that's willing to actually listen instead of just going through a box checking exercise like we usually do. So for instance, you know, what we're hearing from parents across the Commonwealth is the fact that we have a transportation crisis. Frankly, you can make more money, you know, driving for FedEx and getting that $25,000 a year bonus and getting $45 an hour than making $22 an hour driving a school bus. That's what's leading to the transportation crisis. Parents have been saying that this is a problem. It's not being heard and listened to. The social emotional crisis we're seeing now, where we have kids who are acting out and fighting in classrooms and cafeterias and at the flagpole. Parents have been saying over the course of the last 18 months, our kids are coming out of a period of social isolation, and we need to address this by investing more money in guidance counselors and social workers, incentivizing, just staffing up, paying our existing staff more money so we can retain them because our kids are going through a crisis. And this is what we wanted to see districts prioritizing. Unfortunately, we're waiting until we're seeing, the hens come to roost here and all of these problems actually popping up saying, oh, well, I guess we should scramble and try to find these folks. If you had listened to parents and families on the ground and what we were thinking, what we were feeling, our context, our priorities, and when this ESSER funding was coming down and we needed to create these plans, we had forecasted, because we were in conversation with parents and families and communities, and they're saying, hey, our kids are really hurting right now. We're very concerned. We'd like you to invest as a priority in social emotional learning or support. maybe we wouldn't have to wait until we're now having a disciplinary crisis, or kids are getting expelled, or parents are not even enrolling their kids in districts. This is another conversation where we're seeing, parents making the choice not to even enroll their kids in some districts because they don't trust that, the district has the vision, the leadership, and the capacity to actually help their kids overcome this crisis. We're scared, we're afraid, and there's really a crisis of confidence that's going on. So the next leader in Worcester has one hell of a challenge, because it's going to be rebuilding those relationships. There's going to have to be some restorative justice. There's going to have to be some healing, some trust building, and doing that in a very authentic way. And sometimes I feel as a parent activist, I'm giving folks human being lessons, frankly. How do you build relationship and friendship and do it in a meaningful way so that there's trust there? You do it by not just talking at people, not coming up with a plan on your own and just saying, hey, let me show you this PowerPoint and the ideas of what we're going to do to your children, and checking the box that, hey, at least we ran it by you. This has got to be something a hell of a lot deeper than that. So it takes really innovative, thoughtful, courageous leadership, somebody who's willing to say humbly, I want to learn from this community. I want to build relationship with this community. I want to understand where the harm has been done, where the trauma has been impacted. And what I want to do is acknowledge that hurt, acknowledge that pain, and then engage in a process where we're collaborating together. And I'm willing to listen. And I know I have to build trust, because unfortunately, in too many of these situations, we see administrators, leaders of districts, coming in and saying, I'm the new white savior, or I'm the new person who's going to come in and save all these poor people in this underperforming district, instead of saying, we're going to do this together, and I want to hear from you. And I'm not just waiting to speak, but I'm actually listening, and I'm willing to do this with you. So again, I think, we have a unique opportunity here where parents are engaged because we had to be. And frankly, parents are afraid, because we're seeing our kids slip through the cracks. We're seeing, the fact that, we have 3rd and 4th graders who are reading in a kindergarten level, and we're concerned about math, and, we're concerned about all of these different things, and we want to be heard and we want to help. So you have that willingness as well. So again, I think a lot of what Paul was saying and pointing out is very important, but acknowledging that this is a moment where we have a decision to make as to whether or not we want to go back to the same old, which was not working very well before the pandemic, or take advantage of this opportunity where parents and families have really engaged in unprecedented ways, are willing to do the hard work of helping to get this done and transforming our system so that they actually get us to the outcomes for kids that we really want. Because a lot of the time in these conversations, I'm not hearing a lot about that. Like, do we have a shared collective vision for what we actually want to achieve for our children? Because that's why we do all of this.
So Glenn Koocher, you laid out a certain kind of ideal superintendent, and Paul Reville and Keri Rodrigues have both talked about the need for deep collaboration with the community, which is not a natural thing for every superintendent. What kinds of questions should the school committee be asking of candidates to try and elicit whether they are, really committed to that kind of collaboration with families, with parents, with the community? Because I'm just going to say something a little mean. You don't get to interview for a superintendent job without being able to talk good. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you can do the job that has just been outlined by the folks on this panel. So what kinds of questions can the school committee ask to really get to that question?
First of all, they don't always talk well. So, I don't want to undermine your assumption, but sometimes a superintendent's interview can be the longest 75 minutes of your life. But here's what a search committee generally looks for. They want to know Who is this person? How did you get to be where you are? Tell us about yourself. How does this person think? Is this person compassionate? If somebody has a problem, will you care? Or are we simply tools to help you get from Worcester to Larchmont to Chicago to LA? Number 3, does this candidate have the depth of knowledge to understand some of the principles behind what you need to do? What values drive this person? How do we extract those? And if things go well, will you still be here 3 or 4 years from now? And there are a bunch of questions that we suggest. I mean, I can forward this list to you, Jennifer, if people wanted to take a look. There's no secret, but the first thing you want to do is find out from the candidate, what do you know about Worcester? Why are you seeking the Worcester superintendency? And this is where the middle school parents on the search committee are very effective, because they can tell whether you're lying just by looking at you. And especially when you ask them if they're going to be here 5 years from now. So you want to know, why do you think you could be an effective leader? Tell us about the problems you've tackled. How did you prepare? Who did you have helping you? This gives you insight into team building. Tell us about the mistakes you made. It's very—
I like that question.
Yeah. And I hate to mansplain something to you and risk offending your audience, but if you've never been wrong in your life, that's a very hard burden to bear. And some of our candidates have never been wrong in their lives, or if they have, it's because they were covering for somebody else. So you want to find out what they've learned from mistakes and what they are. What qualities do you emulate in the leaders with whom you've worked, or for whom you've worked, or who you've observed? And how can you apply those qualities to your work? What are some of the things you ask the people that you're about to hire before you decide to hire them or recommend them to the school committee? Do you look for things like, what will you do to fight discrimination? What will you do to create equality? What will you do to build collaborations? What have you done? Asking them for specifics is important. A courageous leader is required. How do you recruit courageous followers? And how do you cultivate that cohort? And then when they ask, school committees will ask about very specific technical skills that are required. And we encourage them to probe very deeply when you ask them about collective bargaining, or when you ask them to talk about special education, or budget and finance, which is an area where most candidates are very weak. Relationships with the municipality, which is, most out-of-state candidates are shocked to realize that the mayor of the community is a member of the school committee. They're also shocked to learn that the school department is a department of municipal government and not an independent district. In most states, it doesn't work that way. And when you ask them about collective bargaining, for example, I don't want to know how many contracts you've negotiated, or how many unions you've screwed, or how many people you've tripped up during bargaining. I want to know what you think about the practice of coming to the table and negotiating and collaborating on reaching solutions, and how we can collaborate and be effective in that. And you also want to find out what you can appropriately, personally, about the candidates. How do you relax? What's on your reading table? Who do you recommend to us to help us get a better sense of how schools work? Those are some of the questions that, if probed and followed up in an interview, can help you discern who this person is. How does this person think? If I had a problem, would this person care about me? And is this person committed, or would this person be committed to Worcester or wherever else they're seeking to apply? So that's my sort of guidance on what questions you might want to pose to candidates.
They seem really targeted, and they should elicit the kinds of answers. It seems to me they should elicit good answers, or at least revealing answers. Is that,
You hope.
am I,
Unfortunately, the superintendent search process in Massachusetts is hobbled by some of the regulatory restrictions, keeping the search, keeping the identity and privacy of the candidates quiet, because there are people out there stalking candidates. If you've ever been a principal, be assured that any student you ever suspended from school, or any player that you didn't get enough playing time, has got parents out there looking for your name so they can call Worcester and say, don't hire Terry Smith. Terry Smith hates kids. Or Terry Smith is bad for a number of ways. And privacy is important. And just as, you know, as another interesting element of this, the Attorney General doesn't let you develop questions in confidence. The questions for interviews of candidates all have to be public before the interview starts. That way, you know, it's not the way a really good interview needs to be. You need to be able to have some questions that you can pop to the candidates and get some stuff rather than risk rehearsed answers. So, and in Massachusetts, there are other factors that that discourage people from applying, and we've got to recognize what they are and try to overcome them. You know, we in the Northeast, we already have friends. We tend not to want to make new ones. The traffic signage is bad because we know where we're going. Schools are so obnoxiously and abusively overregulated by the state that is unconscionable, and somebody needs to do something about it.
Yeah, I'd underline that. It was my experience working in the executive branch that whether we were hiring college presidents or superintendent searches, you know, our well-intentioned open meeting laws that then require the disclosure of candidates, you know, in the middle of the process, effectively, is a discouraging factor to a lot of people who might consider applying, but are not going to come forward in the middle of a process when they might not receive the position because it will alienate people in their home communities, and therefore they don't apply in the first place. So that's long been a problem. It's a kind of policy change that a lot of other states have seen fit to make in their sunshine laws, and we haven't done that in Massachusetts. So that would be a policy change. The other thing I'd add to the prior discussion is just, you know, again, there are the privacy considerations, but the searches that I've participated in, for example, when we've sought commissioners of education in the state, the references become really important. And you know, delving into the references, not just in sort of a pro forma query check kind of fashion, but really going deep. So if you're looking for questions about, you know, how effective they are at selecting talent and creating a culture that's focused on continuous improvements, let's just say, you have, they have a track record. And those, you can figure out who they've hired and how they've done and how people in that community feel about the choices that superintendent has made and what the legacy is. Now, granted, there's certain laws that you're going to have to dance around in terms of disclosing why you're doing what you're doing. But we used to do, for commissioner, we do site visits to a community where somebody had been a superintendent and actually talk to people in the community, go to schools, randomly pick up the phone and call people and who are in the community and ask them questions about the quality of the school system and the leadership and things of that nature. Some of that can be done discreetly. So I think making you have to triangulate a little bit. I mean, interviews are great, but that's all self-report. And you've got to get some angles on the self-report from other consumers, other constituents who can either validate or give you a different perspective on what you're hearing.
I have to jump in here too, because, you know, again, I think, you know, what you said at the beginning of this conversation about, you know, superintendents talking a good game, like they do talk a good game. And I'm not interested in people who want to talk about it. I want to see, you know, movement from people who want to be about it. And frankly, I think there needs to be a balance, and doing this process under the cover of darkness where you don't find out until the last minute, maybe who the last two finalists are. And the community doesn't have the opportunity to maybe go back to the community where this finalist is coming from and actually take a look like, okay, well, this guy says he really does engage with parents and families, and he's got this, rosy vision of what he's going to do here in Worcester. But then you go back to the previous superintendency and you find out that, parents were deeply unsatisfied, or he did not have deep connections with community organizations. Like, there's got to be time for the community and parents to have confidence in what the path is going to be forward, and doing that under the cover of darkness is not a good look. So I can understand, not wanting to divulge, to your employer that you're looking for another job. I get it, but there needs to be a balance. And if you are coming forward with references from, parent advocacy organizations or community organizations that are a part of that, I think that should be a part of the process, because you can't just talk a good game. You've got to show what you've done. So when you're articulating a vision for our children in the future, we can have some confidence that you've got the expertise needed to do what has to be done.
Okay, I was waiting to see if there was further. One of the things that it seems to me needs to be sort of upfront and in all the conversations is something that has been talked about a fair amount lately, and that is equity. Certainly, Worcester has had its issues in terms of disparate achievement among student groups. And I'm wondering how you would build equity into the process, into the selection of the superintendent. Maybe Dr. Reville, you could start, and everybody else could jump in also.
Well, I mean, a couple of these things I mentioned earlier, but I'll just highlight them now. Number one is, being honest and transparent about the data. Let's take a look at who we're serving and how well we're doing in serving them. Where are the gaps, and who's well behind where they ought to be now? So I think you have to get that out and get that out into the public. I mean, it's been a long time. I remember in the late 1980s, Peter Negroni, who was a superintendent out in Springfield, was one of the first people, well before it was required by federal law, to disaggregate data. It was quite controversial at the time, and put it up and say, okay, we're not doing well with our African-American students. We're not doing well with our Latino students, and put it out in the community. There were many people of various demographic descriptions who said, don't do that. You're going to create problems. But he said, no, we've got to come to grips with, we're not getting the job done with these categories of people, and we've got to face that. And that has to be the starting point of the discussion. Then the next step in the discussion really is about strategy. And so that's what you want to ask there, because there was a lot of rhetoric out there these days about equity, and about people sort of in a performative vein, just saluting that flag and saying how much they care about it. But what you really care about in a superintendent is, what would be your strategy? I mean, how would you, again, what would you do Monday morning in order to see to it that some of these gaps that we're now experiencing get closed in short order? What will it take to do that job? What kind of people do you need? What kind of resources do you need? What kind of curriculum and instruction do you need? What kind of supports do kids need? What will be your priorities in putting together a program that's actually going to close gaps and guarantee that a much higher percentage than currently is the case of our children coming out of the Worcester Public Schools are ready to be successful in college and career? And so that I would really come at the question of strategy. What are you going to do? What does it look like? What are the actions to be taken? What's your theory of the problem? What's your theory of action? What are you going to do? What will success look like? What evidence are you going to accumulate? How are you going to hold yourselves accountable to achieving this?
I wonder, do you want to add to that?
I would just like to follow up on that. Paul, in terms of the selection process itself, the recruitment and selection process. Are there ways in the full search process that we're about to embark on? Are there ways that we might build equity into that process?
Well, I mean, I just think it's something, it's as you interview candidates, as you write up the job description and what you care about. I mean, you have to, it's ultimately the school committee doing the hiring. The school committee has got to make this front and center a top priority issue. And that gets communicated through all the materials and so forth. And again, it's at a level of generalization that's maybe at 30,000 feet, but you indicate this is a priority of ours in the district. This is some, because a superintendent's going to need a school committee who is supportive of equity strategies. So, that's important for a superintendent to come in. If you have a superintendent come in with a lot of equity strategies, but can't get support from the school committee to do it, then that superintendent's going to have a problem. And if you really want an equity-minded superintendent, then the school committee's got to show we're as committed to equity as we expect you to be. Reasonable people might disagree on strategy, so we'll have to come together on the strategy or the way to do it. But this is a priority. But I think once the process starts, then as you interview people, as you talk to references, as you scrutinize the prior performance of this candidate for the superintendency in other environments, you make that right at the top of your list of questions you're looking for. What did this individual do to advance equity in the community that he or she was in prior to coming to Worcester? What do other key constituents in those communities think of the degree to which this leader was committed actually to equity and achieved on that? So I think it's in walking the walk about caring about equity that the hiring group, the school committee and the selection committee needs to keep. And by virtue of talking about it, you communicate to the candidate, this is what we expect. So I think that's the starting point.
And can I jump into this too for just a quick second? My experience being a part of the Influence 100 group at the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education and trying to really facilitate a conversation around introducing more diversity and equity in terms of leadership and superintendencies and in classroom leaderships, really compels me to just address the elephant in the room when we talk about equity and what that means and creating those conditions. A lot of the time equity means, in this process, how do we attract a superintendent of color? How do we put a Black woman, a Latina in one of these positions, and then create what I call the Obama problem, which is the expectation that now that we have hired a leader of color, suddenly we have equity, and that's not a thing. In fact, what we end up doing is putting the expectation that one person is going to be able to disassemble generational institutional racism in an education system that exists in Worcester. It exists in every single district, in every single community in the Commonwealth and across this country. So again, if you want to attract someone who is reflective of the diversity of the community of Worcester, a person of color, you are also going to have to set that person up for success and give them the conditions that actually make it possible for equity to happen. And that's what Paul is saying. How do we create that space so that someone who has personal lived experience, a person of color, a superintendent who has done that work and has the expertise is actually set up for success so that we can keep them long enough so that we can see the results of that planning and that equity model that they want to implement. So many times I have seen the idea, a school committee will say, oh, we've attracted a person of color. That person will burn out in 2 years because we have the expectation that this person is going to be able to operate in a system that is mired by racism. And it is hard and it is soul crushing. And some of these people leave superintendencies. They don't go, they leave education altogether because it's a lot to ask of a person. So not only do you have to say, we're equity minded and use all of those things that are so in vogue to say, in education right now, but you actually have to create the conditions so that this person can have those hard conversations and do the tough work of beginning to disassemble the generational institutional racism that exists in the system. So making sure that whoever's doing this selection is eyes wide open about what a challenge this is, and what a tremendous honor it would be to have a person of color being willing to accept this incredible challenge, and to do so on behalf of the children of Worcester, because that's a tough job.
And this is not a new issue. When I first was elected to the school committee in Cambridge in 1971, the issue was equity. And the interesting element of this was, Samuel Johnson said that patriotism is the last refuge of the scoundrel. Well, do you ever wonder what the first refuge of the scoundrel is? So when someone would ask, why does this particular school located contiguous to the Harvard campus have lots of resources and wonderful things going for it, and things down at the other end of the city are rather dumpy? And yet I heard from some of the establishment liberals whose names you all know, oh, that's so divisive. Let's not talk about it that way. Let's work on a process and a policy. So what you need is to ask a candidate, what have you done to achieve and resolve a problem of equity? And by the way, what do you see as the major categories of equity? Is it having a faculty that looks like the community? Is it sharing resources? Is it creating or resolving the opportunity gap that some kids have that disenfranchise some kids? What have you done? What are you going to need from us in order to succeed? And let's get some facts on the table. There is far too much rhetoric, buzzwords, and BS floating around the educational community about how we resolve our problems. And we need to get very specific, because I think there are people out there who are really committed to getting this done and looking for the opportunity, and they should be able to explain. Worcester is a very well-known community. Everybody is 1 or 2 degrees of separation away from Worcester. And everyone is going to know that Worcester is looking, because they all go to the association websites and find out what's out there. And you're going to get some good people, and you want to ask the right questions. And being specific about what you've done is key. Not accepting a 5-minute answer which touches all the buttons except the ones you want.
Thank you.
So I'm trying to kind of combine some of the questions, and luckily some of that work has been done for me. But I'm one of the questions from the audience is, so given what we've just been talking about, how do we assure a deep and broadly representative candidate pool? I mean, you say everybody knows Worcester, there'll be a lot of candidates. I'm sure that's true. And yet, will they be the right candidates, I guess? Is there something that the city as a whole, that the city businesses can do, that someone asked this question, what the city kind of, the mayor and the whole city, is there something that can be done citywide to attract the kind of candidates that folks want? That was a question up in the chat.
I think Worcester has what they will need, and that is civic leaders, members of the school committee, the mayor, the city manager, the head of the business community. They're known, and they are able to go out and help sell the community to candidates. It's not inappropriate for a member of the school committee, particularly if it's the mayor. Very unusual that mayors are chairs of school committees outside of Massachusetts. But if, when they're out there available to speak to candidates, want to know if this is for real, when the school committee is actively engaged and engages members of the community in working with them, it can be a very successful approach to convince a candidate that this superintendency is for real and we're genuinely interested in finding the best person.
I would say it's more about just having the right ambassadors, though. It's about creating the conditions and having a united vision for, what we actually want for Worcester's children into the future. So it's not just about going out and having the right people sell it. It's what are you selling? So if we're all coming together and we have a collective vision for what are the outcomes we're looking for our kids, if we want to attract an innovative leader, we have to have some innovative conditions, and they've got to be excited and know that they're going to be supportive. And this is how we're going to support you. Here is our vision for our children. We want to take our kids from here to here. We're not sure how to do it, but we're willing to give you the space, and we're going to give you, I don't know, maybe something crazy like a 5-year contract with all of these conditions. And here's going to be the freedom to choose your staff. And here's all of the things that you're going to be able to pick and select so that you can actually be successful in implementing your vision, and not just implement it in a year and then have people not satisfied with instantaneous results. But we're actually going to give you the 3 years you need to see if you're seeing emerging results. We're going to give you the opportunity to change and pivot if you need to tweak something. Like it's about creating an overall plan that we're arming these ambassadors with so that the conditions are right, and a wonderful, innovative, forward-thinking, progressive candidate is going to emerge and say, you know what? Not only is Worcester a great place to live and a great community, and I love the kids, but these people have my back, and they get what it's going to take, and the hard work it's going to take, and the challenging conversations and the courageous conversations, and like a new approach and a reimagination of what this looks like instead of the same old, same old. If you want something different, you got to act differently. And so I would say, arm those ambassadors with something very different and unique. Yeah, I think the community is worth it. I know the kids are worth it.
I'd add a couple of things in terms of, we're talking really about getting a pool. You want to get the biggest pool of highly qualified, highly diverse candidates that you can get. And so, a first order consideration is when the school committee goes to select a search firm to help in that process. And I think you should be just as equity minded and just as tough in interviewing search firms about what's their track record been in producing a high quality, diverse, and significant pool. So that's one question. The second item is empowering others to reach out. So it's not just who the salespeople would be, but who's going to actually beat the bushes. And the search firm can do a lot of that, and they have contacts, and they know who the gatekeepers are and who keeps the pipelines of who's in the business and so on and so forth. But there are other people, particularly people in the education community in and about Worcester, who have an interest in this, who will know others in the education community, who will sort of spread a network across and say, do you know of anybody good? I mean, anybody in the community who can beat the bush and get a candidate to come out who might not otherwise have come out to come forward for a position like this is valuable. So it's you got to extend your reach in the early stage of the process, and not just passively sit there and say, well, let's see who comes in. Or let's see who applies. Well, I mean, that's fine. You can passively see who applies, but it's got to be more proactive than that.
And we Hilda Ramirez asked, going back just one step about the conversation about equity, is it about equity so much or accountability? And I'm wondering if what you want to hear from a superintendent candidate is kind of the measure by which they are willing to be assessed on the question of equity. In other words, within 3 years, we should see improvements in every student group, achievement for every student group, or 5 years, or whatever time frame. Is that the kind of thing that should be in that conversation or not? You're muted, Glenn.
It's hard to do because sometimes candidates will say whatever they need to say to please the audience. I will say there was a question that was posed to the commissioner when Jeff Riley was hired, and all the other candidates as well. And it was, pretend it's 2 years from now, and you're giving the end of the year summary to the school committee and the community and the Chamber of Commerce, talking about what's happened in the last 2 years. What's that speech going to look like? And then give us some idea of where you're willing to put yourself out. It's very hard to predict we will, or you might not even want to accept certain statistical measures of success, because it's very easy to game those numbers. It's very easy to focus on kids who are at 219 in the MCAS and push them over to 221, or push them from 239 to 241 and game the system. But you do want to try to identify what are the best measures of accountability that you're willing to stand up to, and how would we measure it? And that's also part of the evaluation process.
I don't think that,
No, go ahead.
Keri.
No, I was just going to say accountability and outcomes are important, and we can't pretend that they're not. You know, we need to get more kids proficient on math in ELA, like where the rubber meets the road. Like we can say the next superintendent in Worcester is going to make sure there is a rainbow in the hallway of every school, and everyone's going to feel really good when they walk in the building. That's great. But if the kids leaving that building do not know how to read or do math, they're not going to have a very happy or successful life. So where the rubber meets the road, are our kids proficient? Like, are they learning? Do we have the outcomes that we need? Because the fact of the matter is that is the purpose that we're sending them into these buildings. So you've got to be able to walk and chew gum. Frankly, we know a lot of the ways that we can get these things done. The problem is usually not being able to achieve them because of political mess. Frankly, you know, we need to get the most highly qualified teachers in front of the kids that need the most highly qualified teachers, and the ability to move the most highly qualified teachers to the buildings where the kids need them. That's what's going to move the needle. And making sure our kids are proficient and being able to show your work and say, like, yes, the changes that I implemented resulted in more kids in Worcester being proficient. That's what we need. Because I'll tell you something, I want my kids to be joyful learners, but when they walk out of school and they don't know how to read, and they can't do math, and it takes them 2 years before they can complete a college level course, they're not going to be very joyful having to pay for all of those remedial classes if they even get there. You know, that's not a joyful life if you don't know how to read, you don't know how to do math, you can't get a good job, you know, and that's really, like, we've got to be outcomes focused. And so that's got to be a piece of the pie here.
Yeah, I was just going to say at the beginning of the question, Karin, is that these are not conflicting concepts. Equity and accountability go hand in hand. I mean, it's one of the, equity is one of the goals that you're trying to achieve, and accountability is measuring progress and holding people responsible for whether or not the goal is achieved. And then I think, you know, the other panelists talked about how we make that specific or more general, or how we allow candidates to define that. But yeah, the twin goals of American public education are presumably excellence and equity. We want an excellent school system, but we want it to be a fair school system that provides everyone with an excellent opportunity. And what we're asking candidates for superintendent about is how they intend to achieve that, what they would do to achieve it, and what does success look like in your view? How would we measure? How would we know you've done a good job in 2 or 3 years? And so I think that's a good place to start the questioning.
I'm seeing a few questions that kind of get at the expectation of students. And I'm going to use my moderator power to try and formulate it. Essentially, if an equity-minded, you know, superintendent comes in and is hired by the school committee, how can they change the culture of Worcester, which I'm gathering from some of the questions. Some of the question formulators seem to think that the culture of Worcester does not necessarily support the idea that all children can learn. I am not saying that independent. I do not have independent knowledge of this, but it seems as if there's some skepticism that a superintendent can in fact lead that culture change so that the expectations for all students are high. Is there a way of finding out how well a superintendent can lead that process? It seems to me you've talked about some of it.
Culture is hard to change absent a catastrophic event that forces people to think differently about different things. And I'm not sure that COVID is one of them, but one of the things that can be effective is when underrepresented communities engage in the public process. They can educate the community by having more voices repeating the message that can lead to a culture change. In my adult education training days, you learn that the older people get, it can take as many as 7 times of hearing the same argument made before it will start to work its way in. And I will say one of the key education reforms that people don't seem to have talked about is electing differently the way people represent you in public. I know that the city is moving towards a ward form of electing its school committee members. Election reform is one way to make the boards look more like the city, and then the arguments will look more like those that need to be heard by the members of the community. That's a whole other subject for another time about, election reform. As educators don't like to talk about it because they don't understand the political science that goes into the political process as much. But, again, not that Cambridge is the center of the world, but proportional representation has given us a city council and a school committee that has looked like the city for a very long time. And as a result, it's easier to make some changes that it might otherwise have been prior to the diversification of our elected officials. And I do think that's an important factor.
So when we talk about generational institutional racism, what we're talking about is somebody who understands the belief gap, because the belief gap is what keeps our kids behind. And the belief gap is whether or not we have leadership on all levels of education by people who believe fundamentally that every single child is capable, not just of proficiency, but excellence, regardless of their circumstance. Just because you're poor doesn't mean you're stupid, and too many of the people leading our classrooms and leading our districts believe that kids like mine aren't capable of proficiency. And sometimes it comes out real mean. Sometimes it comes out real nice, saying, oh, these poor babies, they're never going to amount to anything anyway. I'm not going to challenge them. I don't think they're capable. And frankly, there are examples of teachers who have done the work of overcoming internal biases, teachers of color who are leading classrooms, who look at every single child and understand very deeply that, yes, they are capable of proficiency. They are capable of excellence. And because of that, they challenge them. It doesn't take a fancy building. It doesn't take, the latest, curriculum that has just been cooked up. It takes a teacher who is willing to implement that curriculum, because you can have all of those things and they will amount to nothing if you do not have an educator or you do not have a visionary leader who demands that all educators understand that every single child is capable of proficiency and excellence. And I want to call out what Nellie is saying here in the chat as well. And, a lot of why it's so important to have parent leaders, community leaders as a part of this problem, this process, this conversation. They are speaking truth, and this is important context. This is how the community is feeling right now, and that's got to be taken into account. The fact that we have a major disconnect. We have people like myself who were underserved. I was expelled from a public high school. So I come into education with my dukes up when it comes to my babies. I have to drop 2 of my children off at a school that is named for the man who expelled me from a public high school. So ask me whether or not I want to engage and what kind of mood I'm in when I walk into that building. when you do not understand the trauma that has been inflicted on the community because of the underserving, because of the racism that's occurred, the indictment of parents saying, well, you must not care very much about your kids because you're poor or you're working 2 jobs, when, you know, the parents of today were the kids who were sitting in these same chairs not so long ago. Understanding that deeply, and the expectation that parents and families are going to engage with the system, with educators, with administrators who we can see, you know, have that belief gap and struggle with that and look at us as if we're less than, and that we're not worthy and our kids are not worthy and none of us are going to amount to anything. So they don't really have to invest in us, or they don't have to challenge our children. That's got to be something that's acknowledged. And the fact that even today in this conversation, you have community leaders from different aspects, different avenues, different perspectives, all saying the same thing, that there has been deep harm and no restorative justice, and that they're afraid and they're willing to be a part of the conversation and they want to be. I mean, the fact that they're showing up and still willing to engage and have that conversation is a gift. It's time to start having those courageous conversations and setting up the next leader of this district to have successful conversations, so that path that's created as we move forward is done with them. And as Paul said, when you do things with us, we are invested. And we're willing to go shoulder to shoulder with you, because this is our plan, it's your plan, and we have a vested interest in making sure that we disassemble what hasn't been working so that we can actually get this right for our children. We cannot wait any longer, and we're not gonna stand by, frankly, and allow our kids to fall through the cracks.
Karin, I would I wouldn't give up on the premise that a strong leader can change culture. We've seen it. You've written extensively about it, so you should drop your moderator's hat and talk a little bit about your own work, because you've done a lot of work on this, not least of which was about a school in Worcester. I remember you writing about the University Park Campus School, and that was a great example, at least in the old days when I lived in Worcester, in the early years of that school, where they changed a culture, and the culture was an all means all, every kid can do it, personalized culture with a very high set of norms in terms of what faculty expected of one another, what they expected of the kids at a very high level, and how they engage families in the work. I think we see it all the time at individual school levels. You began your presentation talking about the power of principals. Good principals are people who change culture in buildings to move in a different direction. And it's the same thing about superintendents. I remember superintendents like Peter Negroni, who I mentioned earlier, David Hornbeck, who was in Philadelphia, who went right to the belief question that Keri put forward and basically said and acted upon and fired people who didn't share the belief that every child can do this. We need to have high standards for all, and all means all. And if you don't believe it, you don't belong working for this district. And those who manifest that are really pushed out of the district, because it's not, and that's the negative side of it. But on the positive side is, we're going to go the extra mile, whatever it takes, by all means. We're going to make the time, we're going to make the effort, we're going to meet each child where they are and give them what they need in order to be successful, because our success as educators depends upon their success as students. That's the kind of culture you want to inculcate. Now, you can't turn the Queen Mary at a right angle, but you can certainly move things in a different direction and announce that upon the beginning of your superintendency, and begin to take steps that reinforce that culture change in the way in which you interact with key constituencies throughout the district. Why don't you say something about what you've learned, Karin, about this topic?
That the changing of a culture is very difficult, but what I have observed is that it takes a leader who actually really deeply believes in the capacity of all children to learn, and then structures the systems around that belief so that it's very difficult for people who don't believe it to function well, or to function the way they used to function. and some of this is a little bit intangible. Some of it is actually very tangible. For example, just as a small example, a principal who walked into a completely dysfunctional high school his first look was at the master schedule. And this is something that people who don't work in schools don't necessarily understand. The master schedule is like a budget. It expresses your values. And he took a look at the master schedule, which is how what everybody's doing at all times in a school day. And he said, well, this school is sending kids on to be poor all their lives. He could tell that from the master schedule because very few kids were even aiming for algebra by their junior year. And so he immediately changed the master schedule. He put all freshmen in algebra, which was a huge disruption. He did it over the summer. It was a huge disruption. But he also understood that you can't just throw kids into algebra if they really haven't mastered arithmetic, which, if you don't know how to manipulate fractions, you're in very big trouble in algebra. And so, so he built in a second class that would help kids navigate their algebra classes and provide them with the arithmetic that they needed. So, I mean, the point is not the particular solution. The point is you need people who really understand what systems are in place. As you said earlier, Dr. Reville, how school districts work, how schools work, what the relationship between district offices and schools are. And here's another example. Here's a different example from a district standpoint. A principal was told, well, we're all doing professional learning communities. And she said, okay, well, I'll do that. I'm a good soldier. Principals, for the most part, follow directions. And her staff said, okay, but we need a certain kind of schedule in order to do that. And she went to the district and she said, I'm going to do this schedule. And they said, oh, no, you can't do that. And it's that kind of rub between the district and the school. If you want principals to do certain kinds of things, you have to give them the freedom and the support in order to do that. If you don't, you're just hampering the whole process. And it seems to me that for a community to bring in a superintendent, there's also that same kind of support that the superintendent then needs. The superintendent is going to make mistakes. Principals make mistakes. Teachers make mistakes. Students make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. I love the question that Glenn Koocher said, what mistakes have you made and how have you learned from them? Because everybody's making mistakes. There are millions of decisions that are being made in Worcester every day. Some of them are going to be wrong decisions. The question is, how do you set up the system so that all the adults in the system in the district are making better decisions over time, not that they never make mistakes. So how does the community, how does the school committee, how does the community support this superintendent, this wonderful superintendent that you're going to have in a fairly short time? How do you support that person and not undermine, not say, and we want equity? Oh, but what do you mean you want to change the way we talk about gifted and talented?
And that's what I'm saying, Karen. It's really important to do that work now before the superintendent comes in to create the conditions so you don't have to fix it. and, show up once the house is on fire and say, oh my gosh, my superintendent's in political trouble here. Create the conditions so that those things can happen, and you will attract a superintendent that is looking for those conditions so that they can do the work that they know needs to be done. I think that pre-work and doing that beforehand and being very intentional about it is really what's going to be helpful.
So I went on a little bit. You told me to. It's your fault.
It is.
That was great.
We are at 5:45. So I guess I would just like to ask the panel, anything else, including you, Karen, anything else for the good of the order? And I'd also like to remind all of the participants, including our participants in Zoom land, that we are recording this. We will be posting this both on the Worcester Regional Research Bureau website and on the WEC website, along with links on social media. Well, also, WEC and the Research Bureau will also be doing a report summarizing and pulling together the threads that we heard this evening. So with that, anything for the good of the order, and then I'm going to lob things over to Paul for final comments as we adjourn. Karen, anything?
No, it just seems to me that what I would be looking for if I were a resident of Worcester is a superintendent who deeply believes in the capacity of all students to learn and understands how to build the system so that teachers can teach and students can learn and can help educate the entire community about what that means. It's a big job. It's an important job. It's a big job. And as I say, the whole community needs to understand there will be mistakes will be made. And the important part is not whether the mistakes are made, but whether the lessons can be learned from those mistakes. And you make better decisions tomorrow than you did yesterday.
Glenn?
The only thing I would add that I haven't mentioned, because I didn't realize he was on the call, but if someone wanted to talk to someone who's done the work and knows how this is done, I think you want to talk to Ron Walker, who's very much active in dealing with education of boys of color, and was quite successful as achieving or trying to move things to a more equitable fashion in a highly politicized community. And it's nice to at least know that he's still paying attention and still active.
Thank you, Glenn. Paul?
Well, Jen, we had a lot of airtime here and a lot of opportunity to put our views out there, so I don't want to repeat anything except to say that I do think it's an enormous opportunity. I think it's an attractive opportunity. I think that engaging the community and doing some of that kind of pre-work that Keri was talking about, and having the school committee in particular take responsibility for setting out the conditions that will have an open, transparent process. I mean, as you can see from the chat, there's a lot of thoughtful people ready to participate who have views on this, and bringing those views to the forefront, engaging those people in the task, I think will make it a much better process. It'll make it complicated. You can't keep all the people happy all the time. So inevitably there will be differences down the line, but this is what democratic governance is about. And getting the community involved in sort of leaning into this opportunity and reaching out and being proactive in attracting the best possible pool that you can attract, investigating deeply those candidates who come forward, and then giving the maximum degree of support to the new leader who you hope will achieve the lofty goals that you've set for that leader. I think that's the challenge ahead. It's a big challenge, but it's an exciting opportunity and a turning point for the community.
Thank you, Paul. Keri?
I just want to reiterate, I am going to go back over something I said, Paul, but no offense to my friend Glenn here, but if you want to have a transformational opportunity to really engage in a different experience for the selection of the superintendent, not just the school committee, doing their interview, coming up with finalists, this is the new superintendent, but really, like, we have such a beautiful opportunity here, just represented by the people who are here on this Zoom. I'm seeing my friends here at the YWCA that provide all of these incredible wraparound services that are critical to our community and our children and the success. And like, they're going to have a very close relationship with the next superintendent, because they're a lifeline to parents and families in the community, because, our families don't function without wraparound care. And we need that wraparound care to be quality, and having that be, done, in consultation with what's happening in school and making sure that they're closely connected. There's a vested interest that they have in making sure that we've got a great leader that comes to Worcester, and they're here. I see a couple of them. They're showing up. They want to be a part of this conversation. Again, I'm going to reiterate, you have parent leaders and community leaders who are on this Zoom right now, who are showing up, that want to be a part of this conversation. And it's not going to be an easy conversation, because there hasn't been a lot of restorative justice. There's a lot of hurt. There's a lot of trauma. There's a lot of pain and frustration and worry about what this is going to look like going forward, because they're showing up because these are our children. And we have a vested interest in the success of the next superintendent and the success of the system, because their success is our children's success. And that means a better life, an easier life. It means happy grandbabies for us. It means not having to work 2 jobs, maybe just working 1, and having that life that we dream for them. And we don't, we don't get to go back and redo 4th grade if we screw it up. We have to live with the consequences of what this system provides for our children every single day, every single year. So even though there's a lot of passion right now, there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of hurt, there's a lot of trauma, it's worth having those conversations and understanding where that pain comes from, and that fear comes from, and that passion comes from, and acknowledging it, saying, you know what, I hear you, I feel you, and frankly, I need you to channel that into transforming the system so that we get better outcomes for your kids. I mean, the fact that they're here, we're spending 2 hours together on a Zoom, for crying out loud, they're here, they're present, they want to do this work, even if it's hard. They're willing to have the conversation. So engaging them in the process is going to be critical. And frankly, it's going to get us all to a better outcome, a better leader, and a better vision for where we want kids to go, if it's incorporated with our feedback and with our context, instead of, the same old that we always do, where we come up with the plan and implement it on people. It's a very colonistic kind of style, like, we know best. We're going to decide for you, and we're going to do this to your family. We're beyond that, and that's the beautiful thing of the pandemic, is that we've been presented this opportunity. So we ignore them and what they bring to the table and their priorities, and we don't get what we want. So I really want you guys to take a look at who's here, and not just, the families and the parents, but also the business community is here. I see Worcester State University, when the kids graduate from K through 12 education, that diploma better mean something, so we can get them into a college level course, so they're not stuck in remedial courses, so they can thrive at Worcester State, so that they can take the jobs that I know the business community is ready. They want a vibrant workforce, and I want my kid to have a good job. So, really, we all have something to add here, and people are showing up. Let's not lose this momentum and this energy. Let's take advantage of it and really use this as an opportunity to do something that's transformational here.
Thank you, Keri. I want to thank everyone who's been a part of this event this evening. As Keri said, we have been talking for close to 2 hours. That demonstrates real commitment and real passion for this issue and for the kids in our city. I am anticipating that this is going to be the first in a series of conversations that the community has about this important moment in our city's history as we build our city's future. And with that, I would like to, thank each and every person who participated in the panel this evening. Thank you, Karin, Glenn, Keri, Paul. And now let me pass things over to Paul Matthews for final comments before we adjourn.
Thanks very much, Jen. I will make this very quick. I want to echo Jen's thanks to our panelists who've done a tremendous job. And I do want to make sure we frame this as we depart, right? The point of this panel, our two organizations thought it was important at this stage in the superintendent search process, as it is beginning, to bring in some external experts and perspectives from outside Worcester. Just so everyone in the chat understands, this is in no way intended to diminish the importance of local input from the community up. All the stakeholders in Worcester need to be actively engaged in this process. If there's one thing that's crystal clear from everyone's input tonight on the panel, and the very thoughtful questions and input that came in from the chat, the importance of everyone's engagement in this. And so we look forward, as Jen said, this is the beginning of the discussion. It is not the end. It is not the only discussion that will take place. I also want to point out and commend the school committee. The motion to proceed with the search was quite specific in that it actually contains language which reads, prior to the commencement of the search process, the school committee, in collaboration with the consultant, will develop and implement a comprehensive, inclusive public process to solicit input from all members of the Worcester community regarding the needs of the district and the characteristics and skill sets required in the next superintendent. So I think it's a wonderful testament that the school committee put that up front and foremost in the search process. And I look forward to continuing this conversation with all of you, and really want to thank the panelists and Jen and her team at WEC who did such a wonderful job.
Thank you, everyone. Off to the rest of our activities for the evening. Enjoy the rest of the week. And thank you so much. As they say, we will be in touch. So, all right. Good night, everyone. Thank you.